Let me welcome you at our category meeting, which is the last meeting of the category in this mandate, with a very interesting but also demanding topic. So happy to have all of you here. Let me start with the language regime. You can speak and listen to French, German, English, Italian, Spanish, and Polish. And speak at your normal pace, don't rush. Place your earpiece away from the microphone when you talk to avoid whistling noises. And don't get too close to the microphone when you talk to avoid distortions. So that's the message from the interpreters. Of course, we all aim to respect it, to be really well understood with their help. So, as I indicated, let me allow to welcome you all. As I mentioned last meeting of the category Workers Voice, and our today's topic is the role of trade unions in improving productivity. I would like to thank especially our guest speakers for joining us today. We've got one speaker here in person, we've got one online remote speaker. And my special thanks also to Vice President Philipp von Brogdorf for proposing this topic as a workers' group own initiative opinion. So in a way, we are going to also feed by the discussions into the opinion as such. A few months ago, the Draghi report gave a detailed analysis of Europe's weaknesses and strengths compared to its main trade partners. One central concern voiced at several instances in this report was the lack of competitiveness in the EU economy. Since then, the geopolitical situation has worsened dramatically, and the global economy faces mounting pressure, especially with the attacks of the US government on the basic rules of international trade and the adoption of new tariffs specifically targeted at European industries. High energy prices and protectionist legislation in the US risk causing lasting damage to Europe's industrial base, adding to the fears of deindustrialization in Europe. And yet, as a small continent with little to no own natural energy resources or precious raw materials, Europe's wealth hugely depends on its industry, the manufacturing and services sector, and the added value it produces and exports. The competitiveness of our economy, therefore, is more an issue than ever. And productivity is an essential component of competitiveness. So far, everybody agrees. But the picture becomes less clear when it comes to determining how productivity can be maintained or even improved in this context. Employers will quickly resort to classical answers like wage costs, increasing effective working time, and so on. But for many years, scholars have also looked at other aspects of productivity, like wage developments, health and well-being at work, social security, workers' participation in companies' affairs, and so on. During these meetings, therefore, we want to take a closer look at how trade unions can play a key role in supporting efforts to increase productivity through the mechanism in which only they can contribute towards economic growth, namely collective bargaining and or sectoral agreements, as well as also by influencing policy directions towards higher value-added economic activities. Research finds that the positive relationship between productivity and workers' voice is more pronounced when employees directly influence company decisions. Workers' participation in decision-making has a significant and positive impact on firm productivity. The European Industrial Strategy, however, does not address the potential benefits or changes in the organizational structures of industry. Future initiatives designed to improve the performance of EU industry need to consider the additional positive impact on organizational performance of encouraging more involvement of workers in workplace decision-making. And we know that employee involvement is not only about economic gain. More democratic workplaces deliver better working conditions and human-centered management practices. They also help to reduce occupational inequalities. Extending high involvement organization across sectors and workplaces could therefore represent an important step towards better job quality and fair working conditions for all. And while better job quality is in itself an EU goal and our main priority, it is also the key to the sustainability of work over life course and to recovery in the post-COVID-19 period and in the current rapid changing working environment. As companies and organizations adapt to changed circumstances due to the green and digital transitions, now is the time to adapt work organization to support health and well-being and the development of a skilled and engaged workforce contributing to innovations. So, let me now welcome our speakers for today. Marco Wagener, our member, who will present the determinants of productivity based on an opinion prepared by the Luxembourg Economic and Social Council. Welcome, Marco. A presentation will follow in the panel on wage developments and competitiveness by Madame Claudia Fontanari, who is connected online, hopefully. She is an official at the Ministry of Economy and Finance and former postdoctoral research fellow at Roma Tre University. She will be presenting her paper on the role of wages in triggering innovation and productivity, a dynamic exploration for Europe economies. She will be then followed by Dr. Stéphane Collignon in the same panel, welcome, who is a visiting professor at the London School of Economics, among many other things, and he will present an analysis of different factors affecting competitiveness. We will then focus on the issues of productivity and worker-centric AI with the interventions of our Vice President Franca Salis-Madinier. Franca, welcome. And Isabelle Barthés, Industry All Deputy General Secretary. Happy to have you here, Isabelle. And in the last panel, we will highlight how trade unions can positively impact productivity. And here, we will have the intervention by our Vice President, Philip von Brogdorf. Philip, also happy. So we can start, and Marco, you've got the floor.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for the invitation to speak this morning. I will make my presentation in French, so please, dear colleagues, take your headphones. Comme Lucy l'a déjà dit,
as Lucy already said, my presentation is based on an opinion by the Luxembourgish Economic and Social Committee, which produced an opinion on productivity at the request of the government back in 2018. Each year, the Luxembourgish Economic and Social Committee then provides an opinion on the productivity report produced in Luxembourg. And so I want to go through the different factors of productivity in this, but also diverging views between the employees and the employers in the Luxembourgish Economic and Social Committee. As you can imagine, we don't agree on everything. And so first, on what the situation is and evolution of productivity in Luxembourg. What we have often said recently is that there isn't any productivity in Luxembourg, or in fact that productivity has gone down. That's what you can see here. It's going down, but other countries in the Eurozone are not experiencing a lot of productivity, but it is increasing nevertheless. Now, some of this is probably because of the structure of the Luxembourgish economy. A lot of the Luxembourgish economy is really based on services, and that is actually that has very high productivity. If we have very high productivity, then it is hard to bring in additional productivity gains. It's like a top-level athlete, someone who's really at the top of his game might have trouble at improving on that performance in the future. So this might be more the other countries are catching up, really, rather than stagnating in productivity only. But there are other factors as well, and I'll come back to them. And other different ways of measuring productivity. I'm not going to go into great detail here. I think there are certainly people who are more qualified to talk about that here today. But obviously, we can talk about productivity of labor. And that's quite generally calculated and analyzed. So if you have 1,000 workers, for example, and you produce a certain number of cars with those 1,000 workers, and then can you produce more cars with the same number of workers, then you've increased the labor productivity. But the workers don't only use their hands to produce. There are other factors here too. There are production chains, there are robots, we have capital that's in this whole production process. And that's why we often talk about apparent productivity of labor, because there are other factors that play into this as well. Productivity of capital, that's a little bit more difficult to calculate. And there's a productive capital, machines, but there's also financial capital. There's also productivity of the financial resources. That's something that's more difficult to calculate. Global productivity of factors. Here we often talk about technical progress. These are things that can't be explained by the labor productivity and capital productivity, but this is also quite a complex idea. Something that's really quite new is resource productivity. In this context of sustainable resources, with limited resources, we have to produce in a more efficient way and produce more with the same or sometimes even fewer resources. When we're talking about natural resources, we can be talking about things like energy there. Now, there are differences between the employers and workers' representatives here, especially when we talk about real and nominal productivity. If we talk about, when we talk about productivity, we're often talking about physical quantities. National productivity, we look at real productivity. But if you look at the nominal added value, and prices play into this as well, you see that there are productivity gains. And here, Luxembourg has in fact made productivity gains worth 2.75%. And that was between 1995 and 2023. That was more than the Eurozone, less than the EU 27, but there are productivity gains. And that is something that we do need to analyze. So what's going on here between the added value, that is the nominal added value, and the real added value? What price are we using to how does that have an impact on the nominal real wages and real prices? We've seen multinational groups and transfer prices within those groups that can all have an impact on these calculations. Now, if we come to the economic factors of productivity, everyone agrees here that investments play an important role. They're very important a factor in productivity. And here we're talking both about private investments and public investments. we've managed to convince employers to agree about excluding public investments from the budget when we're talking about stability, but and they said, okay, but only if we're talking about truly productive investments for the economy. But they agreed to that golden rule. In terms of international trade, this can have an impact on productivity as well, as can technical progress. Here we're talking about research and development. There are diverging views about digitization and if that really leads to productivity gains or not. Something that's also very important, and this comes from the workers groups, is management. So company management and how managers deal with things. Do they lead their company in such a way that it can actually make productivity gains? And another factor that's often mentioned in OECD work is the demographics of companies. Are we talking about companies that are at the forefront of their sector? Are they at the forefront of digitization, or are they lagging behind? And this is something that's been really important for us as representatives of the workers, to say that companies that are lagging behind are nevertheless are companies that are often quite traditional, and they often have a significant impact even if they're not experiencing much in the way of productivity gains. They're nevertheless very important for the economy of the country, and we shouldn't have any sort of economic policy that sets them aside, that leaves them out of the market. Now, what about social factors of productivity? Here we have income inequality, and this is reflected in an OECD report from 2015 called In It Together, Why Less Inequality Benefits All. It was determined that this inequality does have a very negative impact on productivity. Then we have the environment at work. That's very important from a social point of view, but also from an economic point of view. If you have fewer accidents at work, there's greater security, safety at work. That has a positive impact on productivity as well. And then work-life balance. That's very important as well. If people are happy with that balance, they'll be under less stress. There'll be fewer risks taken at work. Another very important factor is social dialogue and participation of workers. And this too is based on Hans Buchler's work. There was a conclusion there that this has a very positive impact on productivity in companies. So if there's good co-management, that helps productivity. Now, the political and institutional framework is also something that plays into this. If you look at the legal system, if that legal system is predictable, if it's stable, that allows companies to look to the future in a clear way. Same thing if we're talking about the administrative organization and of public bodies. If they respond quickly to requests or questions, that's also very positive for productivity as well, as is social policy. The welfare state allows companies and people and workers to have a good framework, so that social policy is also very important and allows them to not have to worry at work. Training and education, that's important as well. And certainly important in terms of improving productivity. And of course, tax policy can have a positive impact as well. This brings me to my last slide. A few other topics that are often tackled here. The growth model, for example, if you look at a more extensive growth compared to an intensive growth, this is maybe something more specific to Luxembourg, but in our working population, we have almost half are in fact cross-border workers, and employers are always saying that it's easy to bring them in, whereas the trade unions say, well, there's no discrimination between those who work and live in Luxembourg and those who live across the border, and even if there are productivity gains made, there's also an increase. There would also have to be an increase in wages, and that makes the country more attractive for those cross-border workers. Another topic tackled is productivity of the sector, the non-good sector. And here we looked at quality of public services, not just productivity in terms of things being achieved in a certain amount of time. So we're looking at outputs versus outcomes there. And looking at really at the quality of the services being provided. And finally, the National Productivity Council was set up a few years ago. As workers, we agreed that that council should be incorporated into the Economic and Social Committee because we do have social dialogue there between representatives of the workers and the employers. The employers and the government, however, were more in favor of having a technical council, some kind of along the lines of the Public Finances Council that exists. So that's a discussion that we had, whether or not it should be focused mainly on technical considerations or without the social side of things coming into it as much. Now, in the meantime, in the report that was produced, we do focus on social factors as well, and we do ask again to have additional studies from this council to go into this very complex discussion on productivity in more detail. So I think I've probably taken too much time, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marco. Yes, you did slightly. As I know, but seriously, thank you very much for setting the scene. It's never that easy, so thanks for that. And before going to the wage developments and competitiveness part of our agenda, on your tables, I guess you've got this QR code. So please scan it and please fill in a very simple survey we are conducting about our category, because you know we established the category only in 2021, but definitely before the end of the mandate we would like to evaluate the work of the category. So your evaluation plus you've got the part where you can propose eventual topics, issues that might be dealt with within the category meetings in the next mandate. I'm gonna still remind you at the end of this meeting, because as high as possible return on it is important for us for proper evaluation. So thanks for that in advance, and without any further delay, I would like to give the floor to Claudia Fontanari, as already indicated. Claudia, are you with us? Yes, we can see you. Lovely,
Good
we can
morning,
see
everyone.
you, we can hear you. I know that it's going to be quite demanding because I have seen your presentation, but please try to restrict to 12 minutes and it would be really important for us to focus on recommendations, on the tips, tricks we could be using. I hope we didn't lose it. Lovely, yes, we can see you. So you've got the floor and welcome.
Thank you. The paper I present analyzes the causes of slow productivity growth in European countries, focusing especially on the role of real wages. Next, please. The aim of the paper is to provide a dynamic analysis of the determinant of labor productivity growth. So, given in order to assess how the effect on productivity propagate over time. I analyze those effects also at the sectoral level and for different group of countries. And I verify possible asymmetries, which is, are there differences between an increase or decrease of wages, of the effect of wages on productivity. Next, please. Labor productivity is differently defined depending on the theoretical framework, economic theoretical framework. In the prevalent literature, we have that the anemic growth of productivity is closely related to a disappointing economic performance. Why? Because productivity growth is seen as one of the determinants of output growth. And in its turn, low productivity growth is understood as a sign of productive inefficiencies, which is caused by imperfection or rigidities in the markets that somehow hinder the smooth working of competition. And this is why, in this theoretical framework, structural reforms are seen as the main way to strengthen productivity. So in the past, we have seen that, especially for so-called peripheral countries, European peripheral countries, there has been the proposition of these reforms to recover productivity and competitiveness. How? Basically, by containing labor costs, increasing labor flexibility, and in general, increasing competition in the market. Next, please. But this prevalent view has been challenged by various trends of literature that see economic growth as determined by the growth of aggregate demand, which determines both actual output and the long-run path of growth. So the causation is the reverse. It is output growth that determines the accumulation of resources over time and not the other way around. In this context, productivity is seen as endogenous to the growth of output and demand. The well-known Carlo Verdon law formalized this idea. Within this framework, we can also conceive income distribution as not resulting automatically from the equilibrium between market forces, but instead as determined by institutional and social factors. In this sense, wage growth may be seen as at least partly exogenous to productivity growth. So the relation between wages and productivity is bidirectional. If productivity goes up, it opens up space for the possible growth of wages. But on the other hand, also if wages goes up, this would have a positive effect on productivity. Next, please. So I focus on the endogenities of productivity growth to the dynamic of wages. The effect of wages on productivity is not only indirect by fostering or depressing aggregate demand, but it's also direct. So it acts independently and in addition to the stimulus to innovate that comes from the growth of demand. So when cost goes up, and especially labor cost, the firm as an incentive to introduce innovation and thereby to increase productivity. The theoretical reference is the work of Paolo Silos Labini, which identifies two effects of labor cost. The mechanization effect that comes when we have an increase in wages with respect to the price in machine, And so there is an incentive for firms to save labor with respect to other inputs by introducing labor saving innovations. And then we have the organization effect. So the incentive that comes from an increase in wages with respect of the general level of prices. So is an incentive to save labor in absolute terms by a more intensive use of the workforce already employed, like by introducing organizational innovations. Those mechanisms are not automatic and they are essentially dynamic. They takes place in time and involve changes in technologies. Next, please. In the paper, I estimate the Silos-Labini productivity equation, where the determinant of labor productivity growth are the so-called extension of the market, so the growth of aggregate demand, changes in labor cost, the two indicators just mentioned, and investment. Next, please. In the literature, we find general confirmation of Silos' insights and also of a positive causal link that goes from wages to productivity. Next, please. I use a panel of data. A first set of data is on total manufacturing of 14 European countries. A second set of data is on 8 subsectors of manufacturing of those countries. First of all, I use this technique that is called local projections to estimate the Silos-Labini productivity equation for total manufacturing. Then I focus on episodes of large and long-lasting changes of labor cost, okay, to compare if also large changes exert a positive effect on productivity compared to minor changes. And I also look for asymmetries, so differences between positive or negative shocks. In a second step, I apply the same technique to a three-dimensional panel. That means that we are looking at country, sectors, and year. Okay, those 3 dimensions. And I validate the analysis at the sectoral level and for 3 different group of country. I separate between core countries, East European countries, and peripheral countries. Next, please. On the methodologies, I just say very quickly that what we look is at the effect of each determinant of labor productivity over different time horizon. Okay, so we look at the cumulated effect on the growth of labor productivity after 10 years and also on the average effect per year. Each determinant is considered separately. We can skip the other methodology slide. So good. Perfect. Here we have the results. What you are looking at, those graph, is the effect of each determinant. Okay, so we have the organization effect, which is the first indicator of labor cost. As you can see, over 10 years, we have a positive and significant effect on labor productivity. And in the table, you see that after 10 years, the cumulated effect is 4%. So 1% increase in those indicators of labor cost generates a 4% increase in the growth of labor productivity. Then we have the effect of the growth of value added, so the extent of the market, which is the highest effect. We have a 5% effect. And also the effect of the other indicator, the mechanization effect, is positive. It's near 4% again. So with the exception of investment that are not significant, all the insights of Silos-Labini are confirmed. Next, please. Here, as I said, we have 1% increase in wage growth as an average increase, generate an average increase of about 4% in the growth productivity after 10 years, which is 0.4 increase per year. Next, please. Here we look on expansions. So we are looking of especially high changes of wages that last for more than 1 year. So it's an incredibly high growth of wages. or on the other hand, moderation, stagnation of wages, so negative or very low dynamic of wages for more than 1 year. And again, we have in the first line the effect of the graph, the effect of the expansion, and in the second line the effect of moderations wages on productivity. And you can see that both effects, both in the case of positive and negative shocks, are confirmed. Next, please. So we have that large and long-lasting wage changes exert a persistent effect on productivity that does not vary in sign over time. An increase in wages exert a positive effect in productivity. And what we observe in particular is that when we have episode of wage expansion, the growth productivity is on average 1.5 to 2 percentage points higher than in the rest of the sample. Okay, while if we look at episode of wage stagnation, the growth productivity is 1.8 to 2.7 lower than in non episodes. So we observe an asymmetrical behavior. Negative shocks exert a larger effect on productivity. Next, please. Here is the result for the sectoral analysis. So also when we shift at the subsector manufacturing, the effect of the positive effect of the 3 determinants of labor productivity growth are confirmed. In the case of the organization effect, so one of the indicators of labor cost, the effect is almost double compared to the country level analysis. Next, please. What is important here is that by shifting the unit of analysis to the individual sector, we ensure that we are looking at a direct effect of wages. An increase in wages in a specific sector increase productivity in that sector. So there is not only the positive effect that higher wages may have on demand and through it on productivity, but there is a direct effect that works directly from higher wages to higher productivity. Next, please. Here we have the analysis between different group of countries. The first line are core countries in the graph. The second line, East European countries. The third line, Southern countries. Again, investments are very significant. Then we have the first column, which is the one of the indicator of labor cost. The second column is the extent of the market. The third column is the mechanization effect, again, labor cost. So we can see that the extent of the market is equally confirmed for all the group of countries. But if we look at the effect of labor cost, some differences emerge. Because we have that in the first line in core countries, the effect is always positive and increasing. When we go to this, let's call them the 2 peripheries, the East European countries and the Southern countries, we have that the effect is higher when we look at the organization effect, while it is very small when we look at the mechanization effect, and in the case of Mediterranean countries is barely significant. So the effect of labor cost on productivity depends also on social and institutional factors that characterize each country. This is important from the policy point of view. Next, please. This is what I just said, so let's go to the conclusion. Next, please. Okay, so what we found? We found a positive effect of real wage changes on productivity growth that acts directly, okay? It is persistent after 10 years and does not vary in sign over time. Also, when we look at very large changes, is asymmetrical because it's higher in negative shocks, and it may diverge across country. So the fact that in positive shocks we have a positive effect on productivity means that an intense wage growth is not harmful to productivity growth also in the longer run. And this confutes the idea that high wages may be harmful to productivity because, for example, they reduce competitiveness. Looking at the negative shocks, their effect means that wage stagnation is detrimental to productivity growth. So the idea that we find in structural reforms that cutting wages is the best way to increase productivity, it's maybe wrong, okay? Because what happens when we have wage stagnation? That firms have an incentive to increase output by using more extensively the labor input. So I obtain more output by employing more labor instead of using some innovation and introduce new technologies that help me to use more intensively labor and achieving higher productivity. Okay, next please. And we have also seen that in the so-called peripheries, it seems that the easiest way to increase productivity is to reorganize the workforce, because those effect was more striking, rather than increase the mechanization of the production process. No, so introduce other type of innovation, labor-saving innovation. Instead, in core countries where we have higher research intensity and productivity is already more dynamic, here we have a higher ability to react in increases in cost by introducing innovation. Okay, so our analysis suggests that a strategy of growth that is based on structural reforms that try to increase productivity by containing labor cost is in danger of failing in its own purpose and achieving the opposite effect. On the other hand, policies that address higher wages, like setting a minimum wage where you don't have it, or other things like this, will be more effective in improving long-term growth, because they will stimulate aggregate demand, but they also will incentivize firms to innovate, no, and increase their productivity. So, to conclude, let me just say that in many European countries, especially the peripheral one, where labor market reforms began earlier, we have a context of stagnating real wages, labor precariousness, and low bargaining power of workers, which represent an incentive for firms to preserve business strategies that are based on extensive use of labor, and this penalize the growth of labor productivity. In contrast, if we can make policies that are support aggregate demand in order to support economic growth, these policies, they will be even more effective if are coupled with policies that directly address income distribution and higher growth of wages. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Although we did have technical difficulties, and in a way I have been a bit afraid, having seen your presentation before. The conclusions and the recommendations are extremely clear and give us good base for our work, in our daily work, in negotiating, bargaining, and so on. Without any further delay, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good. Can I have my slides, please? Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to present some of my own work about competitiveness. It has become a prominent explanation for macroeconomic imbalances inside the euro area. I'm focusing on the euro area because if I go beyond that, I would get some distortions through the exchange rate movements, which are a different subject, really. I very much also focus, or the work originally started with comparing unit labor costs, and I will, instead of that rather flawed indicator, I will focus on the return on capital as our benchmark, because from that I can then calculate backward an equilibrium wage, and that means we can compare relative unit labor cost levels that indicate competitiveness rather than the ongoing index over time. So if we start with the return on capital, you see here the differences in returns on capital, which are quite substantial between Austria with 11% and Latvia with 54%. On the euro area, on average, is at 14.4% return on capital. And you see here over time how this has changed. There have been significant fall in profitability during the global financial crisis. It more or less stabilized. You see the blue line is the euro area and the red line is for the individual member states. You see some member states are below the European average, some are above it. And in particular, there's a big gap for some of the new and Eastern European member states. Now, the return on capital, the way I calculate it in aggregate for macroeconomy, is the average productivity of capital, which is then multiplied by the profit share. And that means the profit share is the opposite of the wage share, so that we get the average efficiency of capital and the development of the wage share as the competitiveness explanation in the euro area. Here you see the average efficiency of capital, and the red lines or the red countries there are the ones that are the least effective ones. They are there, the effectiveness of the capital stock is lower than on the euro average. Germany happens to be just in line with the average of the euro area, but all the blue ones are more efficient than Germany and the average of the euro area. The wage share, on the other side, has been pretty much constant over the long run, although it has changed in the short run with different shocks, particularly the global financial crisis, the euro crisis, COVID, and the gas prices after Ukraine period. You see here the evolution of the wage shares. Again, the blue one is the euro area, and the red one is the member states. And you can see that there is a relative stability over the long run for the euro area as a whole, but there's quite different dynamics between different member states. Another way of looking at that is by looking at the changes in the profit share relative to the change in the wage share. And the mean or median here, which is the blue line, really shows that this has been remarkably stable and during the long period of 25 years of the euro. It has been affected by shocks like the global financial crisis or the Ukraine crisis. But all in all, we see that there is large stability in distributive shares between labor and capital. Now, the wage share is the relation of real wages to productivity. This is well known. We've just heard this as well. And in this, the unit labor costs are the biggest bulk of the cost. The evolution depends on wage negotiations, unemployment with the Phillips curve, the development of productivity in technological terms, labor market institutions, unionization, welfare regimes, so-called flexibility of labor markets, and also financial frictions. Usually, unit labor costs are measured by indices, which are starting at some base year, and then you get the cumulative change over time. But this is really, this is what you usually get. Jean-Claude Trichet used to take this into the Eurogroup and say, look at, this is before the global financial crisis, and said, look, Germany is stable and other countries like Italy or Spain are up there, and this is a totally misleading analysis. What's wrong with this graph? What's wrong with it is that we don't know what was the equilibrium or the relative level in the base year, in this case, 1999. Therefore, we need an alternative, and this is the point of my presentation. We've called that the Wage Competitiveness Index, which I then calculate backward from the assumption that the return on capital would be the same in each member state of the European Union. This is a sort of simple equilibrium assumption that goes with the most fundamental assumptions of any functioning market economy. So this is our benchmark. From that, we can calculate backwards the equilibrium level of wages, and then overvaluation or undervaluations are indicating whether this is competitive advantage or not. So in other words, this wage competitiveness is the relation between actual and equilibrium wage, and it depends on the member state wage share, the European average share, and the capital productivity of member states relative to the euro area average. It looks then like this. You see here the red line is the equilibrium wage for Germany in the early years, and the actual one is the blue one that you see above that for a long time. We see also that this has started, then there's a gap between that equilibrium and the actual one. When the actual is higher, you have overvaluation. If it is below, it's undervaluation. What is quite remarkable is how much this has changed due to the labor market reforms in Germany during the early 2000s. You see the same picture here over the long run for the 20 member states in the euro area. And you see also that both equilibrium and actual wages are sometimes above, sometimes below the average level of wages in the euro area. The Wage Competitiveness Index is the ratio between actual and equilibrium, which means you have here these horizontal black lines, which is where the equilibrium is. And we see that if it is above that line, then you are lacking competitive advantage in that country. If it is below that line, you are highly competitive. What is remarkable is that you have a lot of the new and small member states which are highly competitive, and the larger ones are not. Germany gained competitiveness after the labor market reforms in the early 2000s, but then during the euro crisis and subsequently all that was lost again, and they have now pretty much gone back to where they were at the beginning of the euro period. France has had a continuous tendency to lose competitiveness, is now highly non-competitive in terms of wage levels relative to the equilibrium. While in Greece, we see that after the euro crisis, Greece started to improve very significantly. And so did Italy, which is some very remarkable improvements. But also what is quite shocking is to see how many of the small and Eastern European countries are dramatically undervalued in their wage levels, which really means that they could increase their wages substantially. The causes here are basically excessive real wage increases over labor productivity, which is the national wage share, or the variation of the euro area wage share, which creates an asymmetry, and then the difference in the average capital productivity. And we can calculate some kind of elasticity by which this wage competitiveness indicator reacts to these three causes. And the interesting thing here is that you see that the negotiation of the wage share, meaning nominal and real wages relative to labor market productivity, is fairly high. The elasticity is high. The European wage share, if it increases, will benefit those who are not increasing. So in that sense, but what we see also is that that is the same for both sides. So it's up and down, positive and negative, they balance out. What is the significant improvement in competitiveness is that you improve your capital productivity relative to the euro area. And you see here these relative weights. The blue one on the left is the wage share negotiated on the level of member states. The orange one is the effect of variations in the aggregate of the euro area wage share, and you see the green ones as a contribution of national capital productivity. So what is the conclusion of all that? The national wage bargaining is of course important. There was the Rehn-Meidner rule, which claims that if you would stabilize wage shares if you are keeping wage increases in line with productivity and inflation, but that does not correct the disequilibrium. In the early 2000s, when we started the so-called social dialogue, or wage, what was it called? So macroeconomic dialogue, this Rehn-Meidner rule, quite important in Austria and Germany, was kind of introduced into the European debate. But I think it is mistaken because it doesn't look at corrections of disequilibrium between the member states. Because large countries, especially Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, influence the average of the euro area over proportionally, they have a special responsibility. A 1% deterioration in the wage competitiveness index in the large countries improves the competitiveness for the small countries by 1%. That means it creates a labor market distortion of 2% together. But the smaller member states, they have room for higher wages, which would correct the overvaluation, overvaluations for the member states if they did this in total. But if it is just on individually by a small country, it has no effect on that. So finally, that would also be interesting. How do policies, macroeconomic policies, influence the equilibrium wage? Because the equilibrium wage, after all, is that which allows improvements of living standards. The positive impact of policies are the national average capital efficiency, labor productivity, and aggregate wage increases, plus the budget surplus. Negative impact is the aggregate European capital efficiency, fiscal consolidation, and monetary instability shown by high spreads in that respect. So the average capital efficiency plays a crucial role also for labor productivity. Higher investment improves both capital and labor productivity due to technological progress, but the elasticity by which labor productivity responds to capital efficiency is high, and a 1% increase in the average capital efficiency at the euro level is associated with an increase of 1.79% increase in labor productivity in the long run, on average and across the euro area. So estimates for production functions show that these effects for increasing wages are higher for countries with a high elasticity of substitution for capital and labor. And that's my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Let's immediately move to the impact of new technologies, and we are by that coming to Franca, our rapporteur of the Worker AI. So Franca, you've got the floor, 10 minutes if possible.
Oui, alors bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Good morning to one and all. We've had a number of very interesting and dense presentations, so let me shake things up a bit. I think we all know the topic I'll be talking about, but I'll just try and approach it from a different angle. What is changing on the labour market, and then in particular against the backdrop of the geopolitical events and everything that ties in with the digital transition. Now, this technology, which I'm going to talk about, artificial intelligence, will also lead to incredible gains in productivity. But before we start looking at that, let me just look at what we mean by saying AI in the workplace. I use a fairly consensual definition in Europe because it's part of the AI Act. What is an AI system? Well, let me draw your attention to the fact that it's a system which allows for automated decision making or semi-automated decision making, which functions with a certain degree of autonomy and interacts with workers by having influence on them, by producing content and recommendations for them and forecasts for them, and it's something that keeps developing. So they develop and adapt, are opaque and lead to immediate results. Now, since 2022, a new form of AI has been spreading like wildfire. Open AI, producing Chat GPT in 5 days, got 1 million users. Now Netflix, just to give you an idea, it took 3 years to get up to 1 million users, but it's an almost free app. At least the basic version is free. It's spread very quickly, and you don't need any heavy infrastructure for it. So these apps and applications applied to the whole sector, its use is now well established across the globe in even the largest companies. They're investing heavily in that, and SMEs also use AI, but on the whole those are free tools, and the workers of course also use free tools, and they use the shadow Chat GPT. So salaried workers sometimes use it, even though they need to conceal the fact that they need it, because it saves time, but for employers it might be an issue because of confidentiality and so on. So this is a technology which is generally used. To give you an example from the past, it's like electricity. Everyone uses it. And there are a lot of different uses to it. It can carry out analyses of databases, produce images, videos, films, and so on. And it has a major impact because this technology isn't just used for sort of menial day-to-day jobs carried out by low-skilled workers. No, it applies to all jobs and all skill levels because it has very strong cognitive ability. So as I see it, it's a complete game changer. As I said, it's quick, it's straightforward to use. It can obtain a lawyer's or doctor's degree better probably than a human can, and it can take decisions autonomously. That's the first time that's happened. Even an atomic bomb, a nuclear bomb, has far-reaching consequences, of course, but the decision to drop a nuclear bomb is still taken by a human. It's not the bomb itself that takes that decision. And that's what sets AI, generative AI, apart. Now, it can help you plan work, attribute tasks, measure the performance of workers. So it changes the content of work, really, because you start looking at quality, control, there are companies in the chemical industry, but also the automotive industry, that use AI to check the quality of products, and we know that does it 7 times better than a human could, and that, then prompts the question: what do you do with the humans in that system? So there are opportunities to do with exposure to risk. There are certain, you can use it in dangerous environments. Nuclear, for example, comes to mind. But even in hospitals, in a radiology ward, it can improve autonomy, the room for maneuver, and there are clearly efficiency and productivity gains. So there are opportunities, and it's also interesting for lower skilled workers. It can also be put to the service of innovation. But of course, with opportunities come risks. It might encroach on fundamental rights. There's the example of the Amazon algorithm, and there was a bias to it because it's selected the algorithm, and it would only select men because only they were deemed fit to work for Amazon. But then there's everything to do with that. What kind of tasks should humans continue to do? That's a societal and trade union discussion. And what tasks do you give to a machine? Now, if you say to someone in a bank, well, you're not going to get a mortgage, well, if there's an algorithm that takes that decision, then the citizen might feel upset. Who's taking this decision? Is it the algorithm, or is it the bank clerk or bank director? And the same applies to family benefits. For example, in France, the algorithm had a bias too, and worked against the interests of women living in certain areas. So there are opportunities and risks. Now, we want human-centered AI in the EU. We stress that a great deal, and where humans have the final say. But that approach is under threat. If you look at the current legislation, and this is something that I develop in my opinion, which was adopted in January of this year, then the current legislation in terms of what we have by way of quality and regulation might be enough, but it doesn't fully meet up to the challenge. So there are gaps that still need to be filled, and we also need to make sure that there's explicit guidance in place so that the legislation that we do have in place is interpreted correctly. But when you talk about artificial intelligence, the main thing people worry about is, will it steal my job? So the forecasts all seem to differ and contradict each other, but if you look at the net loss of jobs, if AI were to be introduced as an instrument, then you see that the various forecasts sort of run the whole gamut, the whole spectrum. These are not trade union forecasts. This comes from the International Monetary Fund, and the prediction is that there'll be job losses to the tune of 30% by 2030. If you look at the French Commission, and I participated in that, then between doing away with certain jobs and creating new jobs, there's a net loss of 5.5%. So the forecasts differ. What we do know is that there's a great deal of uncertainty surrounding this, and that more recently there's the ILO study that points to the fact that high-income countries like ours, there's a 24% degree of potential job losses, and a great deal of uncertainty then. Nobody knows what might happen to those jobs. Then there's the vulnerable groups. We've identified 3 major groups: women, low-skilled workers, and seniors. Why have we identified these as vulnerable groups, groups where jobs might disappear? Well, it's because they are vulnerable because they're in jobs that do not use AI a great deal, and they don't have access to AI training, which will make all the difference in future. So I draw your attention to those three groups. There's no predeterminism either. If productivity gains are achieved, if productivity goes up, and if jobs are lost or certain professions indeed disappear, or if jobs indeed become sort of more skilled, then all of that will really depend on how we as trade unions provide a counterweight and negotiate all of this, and it all depends on public policies, tax policies, the policies that allow us to shape the regulatory framework. And of course then we also need to look at progress, inclusiveness and so on. Now here you see a declaration by the social partners, which goes back to the G7 summit that was held in Italy. Now, Isabelle, of course, will complete the picture for us, but we need workers that negotiate. There are very few agreements on these challenges, but there are a whole raft of issues that will have to be negotiated. If there are productivity gains, how do you divide those? How do you and there are also the major challenges. But with that now, I'll leave the floor to you, Isabelle.
Sorry. Sorry, Franca, you got so enthusiastic and in it, and I know you, so of course I didn't want to interrupt you, but I guess there's going to be a lot of questions and comments then after finishing all the presentations, and I guess we should also be fair and leave, the audience to get into that. So without any further, Isabelle, happy to have you here. Your view from European federations, very much oriented on the productive manufacturing industry. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for inviting me. I'll be very brief. A lot has been said, and what I would like to do here is to bring the point of view of a practitioner, actually, because the debate here is really key. Productivity is essential for trade unions. It's important for companies, but it's also essential for trade union when it comes to improve working condition and of course negotiate wages. And within this debate, especially in our industry, the question of introduction of new technology is absolutely key. And what I would like to share with you is a study that we have conducted on the impact of digitization and artificial intelligence in industrial sectors. So, it's not a surprise. AI, Franca was talking about generative AI, was talking about all forms of AI. It is actually already very largely deployed in industry along the value chain, in manufacturing and also in after-sale and maintenance. And we have actually conducted a study looking at the impact in our study is actually looking at some sector in particular: energy, pharmaceutical, telecom, and automotive. What is very important to point out in this debate is that in the context of greening, the green transformation, digitization is also accelerating. This is a key enabler of greening, and when we are talking about digitization and artificial intelligence, everything linked to improve productivity and competitiveness. It is about efficiency, it's about being more reliable. Franca was talking about product quality, about consumer satisfaction, also predictive maintenance, also seamless processes, process of optimization, forecasting, and also augmented reality, and there are many more. So when we are talking about investing into digitization and AI processes in industry, I mean, the main objective is to improve competitiveness. And in our study, we are been looking at different aspects. I mean, the impact on employment in general, the impact on quality of job, but also we looked at where we are with productivity. And as Franca pointed out, it is clear that the analysis that we can make now is not so clear. I mean, it is clear that AI might boost productivity, but the results are too fragmented to be conclusive. They are too conclusive, they are too fragmented to be conclusive now, actually, because, I mean, this is a breakthrough technology. What we see in our industries is that you have some activities which are digitalized and where you have artificial intelligence, but processes, the complete industry are not yet digitalized. So, I mean, this is, and you have lots of literature now saying, well, maybe after all, AI is a bit of a hype and we cannot really anticipate. Our analysis is, I mean, for the moment, we don't really see a clear evidence on productivity, but this productivity game will come later. What our study also show is that the effect on productivity depends on how AI is used, and especially when it comes to workers, is how they are trained to use this new tool. I mean, AI requires a complete new way of thinking, also making sure that workers are, I mean, first of all, that the human being remain in controls. But I mean, in order to do that, you have actually to have a very critical approach on AI. And we are not there yet in industry. I mean, the approach is often the machine is right and the workers maybe are not right. So it's a new approach to have. I mean, we are talking about being AI acculturate. I mean, it's really important to make sure that we have more AI literacy. And the second point also that we have to talk about is how these productivity gains are shared. Because we have, I mean, we know that ultimately this will have an impact on jobs. And we have to decide whether this is actually leading to job being shed, or we have another approach, whether this is leading to a reduced working time, whether this is leading to better working condition. I mean, this is absolutely essential in the debate, because it's also about acceptance of the change. And hence, the question of informing and consulting workers is essential here. One of the challenges with AI, which is also pointed out by our study, is that very often workers and their representatives are not even aware that AI is implemented into their company. So, and because, I mean, this is not a material investment. I mean, if you have a new machine, I mean, then you see the machine. I mean, with AI, it's a little bit more complicated. So there is a strong tendency of companies of skipping their legal responsibilities or to comply with them too lately. So, I mean, and We have actually new legislation. I mean, Franca was talking about the need to have appropriate regulatory framework. We have the AI Act, but we also need appropriate legislation. I mean, we are more and more talking about the need to have a control of algorithmic management. It's really important. We've seen how this was now developed in the platform work directive, especially on the control of the algorithm, how we can make the algorithm more transparent. So, I mean, all these issues are at stake, and of course, we need regulation, but at the workplace, what we need is more information, more consultation, and also we need to negotiate the effect of AI. And for that, we need to make sure that workers are involved in due time and they are properly informed. So the whole question of transparency and making sure that workers are properly fully informed about the potential effect is a real issue. The other point that I'd like to mention the last point I'd like to mention is this debate about AI is that there is an understanding that AI is an intangible technology. But in reality, AI relies heavily on real infrastructure, on energy, on water, and also on workers, actually. And already what we see is that data center dedicated to AI requires between 6 and 9 times more energy power than classical racks. And we see that data center consume 2% of world electricity, and this share will increase. We also see that, of course, we need all these click workers. So this also has to be taken into account when we are talking about the impact of AI on productivity. So to conclude, I will just confirm what Franca was saying. There is actually no technological determinism when we talk about AI. And it is clear that AI will have an impact on competitiveness and productivity. The main question is how do we do it, and how do we make sure that the impact and the productivity gains are actually shared between also with workers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. I mean, all together with all the speakers of this morning, 5 of these, you got very interesting views on the main topic of today. So I'm not gonna step into that, although I feel tempted to do so. But hands up, who would like to have comments, questions? Jack, Dumitru, Manuel. So I've got on my list, Isa? I've got Stefano, I've got Javier, I've got Andrea Monet, I've got colleague Bersa. Sorry, there are moments when I'm out of my memory. I've got Jack, I've got Dumitru, Manuel, Isabelle, Tatiana. Anyone who is not on the list and would like to contribute? Okay, I've got Florian, which is 10 speakers. So please limit yourself, and I'm gonna be strict here, to 3 minutes of contribution so that we could have really time enough for our speakers to react on the different contributions and all questions. So Stefano, please go ahead.
Sì, thanks Lucy. I will speak in Italian, so please take your headphone. A special thanks for our guest for this very impressive presentation. È chiaro che però mentre sentivo
While I was listening to the speakers, I suddenly started thinking that it shouldn't be Group 2 members listening to you, but Group 1 members, really, from the employers, because a great deal of what has been said today is what our competitive strategy is when we talk to companies. We have always had a strategy where we talk of system competitiveness. Even the most productive, competitive company, if located in an area where there are inefficiencies when it comes to transport, public administration efficiency, and so on, will have to deal with those inefficiencies. So we talk about system competitiveness. It's not just about how production is organized. What matters is where it is located. And therefore, all of the connections of institutional nature matter. So if you have system competitiveness, you need to make sure that a whole raft of services are available so that that can take off. So Professor Collignon, the provision of public goods and public services, does that have an impact on productivity? I know that you're an expert in the field, so that would be my question for you. To what extent might public services influence the competitiveness of the whole system? Now, for a long time, we based competitiveness on reducing labor cost and the greater flexibility of labor. That led to an increase in precariousness. We didn't try and achieve competitiveness through product innovation based on a green transition. And that is certainly true for the automotive industry, an industry which in Europe is now in crisis. It's really a paragon of the wrong choices that have been taken by management. And I have a question for Professor Fontanari and for Isabelle here. You were critical, and all of those points are reflected in the automotive industry. So could I invite a comment from both of you on that? In closing then, we shouldn't leave it up to the national competitiveness committees to deal with this issue. This is an issue which needs to be dealt with, bringing in the social partners that represent the workers, that go to work in these companies, social partners which can make a contribution of fundamental importance. Now, Franca, I'm sorry, I don't have a question for you, but that's because I'm simply out of time, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Javier, please go ahead. 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Lucy, I will speak Spanish, please. En esta ocasión solo voy a hacer...
I'm just going to ask a few questions this time. But I will also say that I think what's been said has been really interesting. Marco, Isabelle, all the speakers have been interesting. Can you hear me, Professor Collignon? Okay. I'll just wait a moment.
Cállate. Sí. Sí, ok, sí, sí.
Okay. Well, thank you again to all of the speakers for the really interesting interventions. I'm going to focus on what Franca was saying. Unfortunately, the mic has been cut.
Agradezco las
Okay. Thank you again. I'm going to focus on Professor Fontanari and Professor Collignon, what you said. And as Franca said, it was a bit more dense. There were some mathematics figures that went really fast on the slides, and I'm sure we'll have time to look at that more closely when we receive the presentations. We had, I'd actually like an opinion about the conclusion from each of you about the conclusions that the others drew. Not to create any sort of confrontation or anything, but I mean, there were differences, and I think that would really help clarify things to me. Now, Professor Fontanari, you had quite a clear conclusion to your presentation. And there was this direct correlation between the productivity and increase in wages that leads to productivity in the sector, where the activity is produced, not just as a increase of demand. Now, the
Professor Collignon can understand me. No? I will speak in English. Well, I asked Professor Fontanari and Professor Collignon their opinions about the conclusion of the other presentation. Why? Because I think that the conclusions are not the same. The conclusion of Fontanari is increasing salaries, wages in the same sector include, no? Produce increasing of the productivity. And your figures, the relation in between salaries, competitivity, that is not the same, competitivity and productivity, of course, but in several countries are not the same. I think so.
Thank you, Javier.
For me, it's very important.
Let's leave some time for them, because it's going to require quite some time.
Sure.
You've got still half a minute. That's correct.
Okay. This is my question, Professor Fontanari and Professor Collignon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being brief. Andrea Monet, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to speak in Italian. So. Sì, anch'io volevo ringraziare.
I too, of course, would like to start off by thanking all of these speakers.
May I go? Yeah. Volevo appunto ringraziare innanzitutto.
As I was saying, I of course too would like to thank all of these speakers because they've provided us with very important arguments to counter some of the assessments that are proffered by the employers, which is a point made by Stefano before me. Now, Professor Stefanari has told us very clearly not only how productivity can lead to wage increases, I would say must lead to wage increases, because we've seen a disalignment in certain countries between the increase in productivity and a decrease in wages. So productivity gains need to lead to wage increases, but she also explained how wage increases don't bring pressure to bear on productivity. So it's a very important argument, and as Stefano was saying, it's certainly something that we can use in negotiations with employers. But just a comment and then a question for Professor Fontanara and also Professor Collignon. It's something that was touched upon only. Marco hinted at it, but Isabelle also referred to it, and that's the link between governance, a company, and productivity. What we see nowadays is that productivity factors are not only and solely linked to production factors. Often during negotiations, it's not the whole capital that is generated that is looked at, because a lot of it is lost through dividends. Stefano gave the example of the automotive industry. Now, dividends nowadays take away capital that could have been reinvested to improve productivity. Often, in many companies in Italy, for example, we have 400 stock-listed companies, only 9 of them have majority shareholdings, and the capital in those companies therefore is very fragmented, and you have cross-border investment funds. They want short-term profits, and often there's 3 to 4% shareholding on their part, but they nonetheless have an impact on the company strategy, a major impact, which means that if workers had greater participation in the boards, and if workers were to be united and become shareholders so that they can provide a counterweight to these major investment funds, then the company's strategies, where they invest and how they achieve productivity, could be influenced. So Mrs. Fontanari, Mr. Collignon, company governance, what role does it play? It's not just about information and consultation of workers, but true participation of the workers in the boards. Do you think that that might have an impact on productivity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Florin Bercel, please. 3 minutes.
First of all, I would like to thank you for the presentations. It was a really very comprehensive presentations coming from different angles. And what I would like to say is the fact that we have to look behind those nice declarations and to see that for all those crises that we've been through up to now, the workforce paid the highest prices for that. For COVID crisis, for the Ukraine crisis, and all of this stuff, the workforce has really impacted. So. And the capital, on the other hand, recovered quickly after this crisis, and also they make again higher profits and generate inflation, which always affect workers again. So, what I see now is the tendency that the wages want to be decoupled from the growing of the productivity. So what we need, and I'm saying that because Isabelle is here with us, so we need to push more. I think the workforce need to push more for some frame agreements at the European level to be sure that part of the let's say profit that is made based on the introducing AI should be shared between the workforce and the need of workforce to retrain or to be used also for the workforce, and the other shares, okay, for the shareholders for the profit, and which is normal. And also we need, because I'm coming from the energy sector, we need an investments, real investments in the energy sector in order to comply with the new legislation according to the environment and to the clear transition and so on and so forth. So we need to push for some frame agreements to ensure that the transition and the introduction of the AI is made keeping in mind there will be a fair transition for the workforce. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Florian Jack, please, your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lucy, and good morning, everybody. I want to thank you all for absolutely superb presentations in what is a very, very interesting and important discussion. But given the title, the role of trade unions in enhancing productivity, I just want to put it to the speakers and maybe to Philip, who hasn't spoken yet, that we can't really address the productivity gap by focusing on the factor of labour alone. The European Centre for International Political Economy, which we all regard as quite a free market institution, but that doesn't mean that every single thing they say that is wrong, produced a report in May of 24 which suggested that information and communications contributed 20% to productivity, hourly productivity in the United States, whereas over the same period it contributed only 12% in Europe. And that's an enormous gap. And if you look at the figures over a more recent period, it's even more dramatic. And they're arguing that in order to catch up by 2030 or 2040 or 2050, European countries would need to spend between 100 plus 157 billion and 1.2 trillion annually in R&D in this area, include AI now. So this is quite dramatic, and the trade union movement must have a policy approach on this. Draghi did address it in his report, but not very directionally actually. Placed a big emphasis on skills and training and on R&D, but didn't say very much about how the R&D should be done. But the point is that for us, I would say, if we are to develop a policy on this, which is an existential issue, because if we continue to fall behind, it's not just profit and loss that will be at issue, but it's the whole European value system, our values that will be ultimately at stake. And we do need to have a policy on how the issue of the R&D gap, the investment gap in ICT and now in AI is going to be addressed. And I would argue that Draghi does not go far enough in terms of direction in this area, and we in the trade union movement should be arguing very coherently for a role, a directional role for the states, coordinated by the EU, because clearly, notwithstanding the experience in the US, leave it to the market isn't working.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Dumitru, your 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Very interesting discussion, and from various geographical perspectives. I would like to continue the idea which has been expressed by our Romanian colleagues before regarding the AI and the implication of automation of on the industrial processes, and which kind of economic and social model we will need in order to govern these new transformations. As we all know, in China they are operating already the dark factories, no lights, no workers. So they are fully automated and operated by AI. So in this paradigm, what is the so-called competitivity? What is the production? Are all the issues we discussed based on Marxist formulas? So we will need another model, ideological model, in order to rule this kind of society. We as workers, we are heavily taxed by the governments, and the communities are living based on our work and based on the taxes which they have from our activities. But how this will be taxed, these new devices, you don't know what to qualify them. If they are robots, they said that they are no longer robots, they are just agents. So these agents, they are playing an important role in our societies. So if you leave as it is the situation, we will assist to a high concentration of power, economic, financial, and political power in the hands of the few. And this is a nightmare for everyone and for every workers in the world. So the responsibility of these people has to be worked out, because sometimes it's hard to understand. If you see the discussion with Mr. Musk, for example, in the United States, it's not even possible to understand. I am your father, I can give you what you need, so what is your problem? Don't question anything from what I am saying. It's the problem of the society to determine the rules in which operates these systems. Otherwise, we will be like the people from Americas when they get in encounter with the Europeans, with the guns, and the others with the knives. So it's important to organize the things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dumitru. Manolo, your 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I speak in Spanish too. A ver, nos enfrentamos en primer lugar a...
So, first of all, thank you very much to the panel for these really interesting interventions. Thank you for talking about this at this particular time. Some right now are calling for deregulation, deregulation to improve competitiveness. We have others calling for other things. No matter which way we go, we're going to be confronted with the unknown. Now, I know the evolution in the automobile sector over the last 30 years, and we've seen ideas for improvements. Mr. Lopez had talked about this back in the day, and what we're looking at today, in particular Europe, more use of robots, use of AI, incorporating that into productive methods means that we really have a different method now of co-participation and democratic labor. And without that, power would simply be concentrated in just a few hands. The models that we have of greater representation also need to be adapted to what exists today. When we talk about control of algorithms, as Isabelle mentioned, this is one of the basic pillars here, because without that, it's impossible to deal with the current context and to provide any sort of alternatives. And this is also linked to decreased working time. Productivity is not, we're going to need a new model of productivity based on other things as well, based on quality, co-participation, and in particular on taking advantage of what we have right now. And this is something that we need to learn in Europe. We need to learn from what's been used in the automobile sector, but others as well. We need good practices as regards production and as regards the products that we produce in Europe. And I think all of that needs to be incorporated into our methods, or it's going to be very difficult not to leave people behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manolo. Isabelle, your 3 minutes.
Sí. Muchas gracias, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you very much for this discussion, because it's really very interesting. And I know there's a long ways to go with this. I have a comment on artificial intelligence and its consequence in the workplace. Now, it's true that beyond competition, we have other issues, safety at work, things like that, lack of opportunities for women, that is directly linked to algorithm use, And that does have a catastrophic impact on the workforce. But what I really wanted to say, I have a question for Franca and Isabelle in particular. This has to do with the last point that Isabelle mentioned in her intervention about the environmental impact of artificial intelligence. It uses so much energy and water, and we know that that's going to continue to grow. And when we talk about hypercomputing and the cloud computing, that's something we've been talking about for a long time now. But now I think we need to focus specifically on how companies are going to offset their environmental footprint. This is something that we have to talk about. We need to put proposals on the table. And I think there's an imbalance as well. On the one hand, we're talking about reducing fossil fuel use and reducing emissions in traditional industries, but at the same time, we're also seeing environmental issues, sustainability issues as regards artificial intelligence. And so that's the comment I wanted to make. It's also a question, as I say, for the two speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. Tatiana, 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, I found all presentations not only very informative, but also inspiring. Starting from because I'm coming from Lithuania, that we have so much space of maneuvering to demand higher wages, and also looking with pleasure and listening Franca and Isabelle, and your dedication to the developments in the area, which is quite dynamic now and probably should be called revolutionary. I want to be optimistic. However, I'm also looking at the statistical data, and I have some concerns, starting that with the figures that only 55% of adult population in EU possess basic digital skills. When we speak about numbers, it's around 145 million adults currently in urgent need of upskilling and reskilling due to digital, but also green, which is going hand-in-hand transition. Then there are huge country disparities. We see here, for example, 83% in the Netherlands, and then we see 28% in Romania only. That also are not, of course, moving us to convergence. What I see also, and brings me a little bit of pessimistic view, that maybe also the stone to employers' garden, because as trade unions we have to do our homework, but only around 20% of our employers really introducing and taking seriously the AI technologies. And in the places where it is introduced, it's not communicated properly. There is a lot of fears from employees that once they will help to develop AI at workplace, they will be simply replaced by these tools. And the more they contribute to development of AI, the less opportunity they have themselves to remain in this position. And we see it's true. We are losing now translators. We are losing now secretaries, and so traditional professions we used to have. So my question is how we can really organize the training, I mean, as trade unions also to contribute to comprehensive training programs, which include not only digital skills, but also critical thinking, ability to analyze and distinguish between their information and disinformation and fake news, to be resistant. So it's like really comprehensive programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. And last speaker on my list is Florian Marie. Please go ahead, 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, dear President. First of all, thank you for this subject. I think it is crucial for our work as the trade unionists, especially the ones which are negotiating collective contracts. I'm totally agree with what Stefano and Jack mentioned. Workers alone are not responsible for the productivity at the company level. And I think we should extend this in a context in which the productivity topic should be approached in a transnational, taking into account the transnational production processes, because we do have a lot of multinational companies which are right now producing in several states. Well, all the presentation were quite appropriate from my point of view, but most of them have approached the productivity only taking into account the national aspects, meaning they have produced, or they have approach taking into account the country situation, the national situation. My question to you is the next one. What about transfer of the capacity of a company to transfer productivity from one state to another? And I will give you a concrete example. A company, for example, a company is producing in several member states. 80% of the productivity is being made, for example, in Romania. I am from Romania. But the wages of the Romanian workers are 50% lower than other production branches. So what kind of narrative should the trade union deliver in this situation when the productivity or the benefit of the productivity is being unequally distributed? And then the last question is, Andrea mentioned actually the company governance, and I think it's relevant. But what about the company ownership? Because we are seeing huge differences when a company is owned by a fund or is owned by a person, and you know basically with which person are you negotiating. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all the comments, questions, appeals. I mean, we've got 5 speakers. I hope still Claudia is with us. Yes. Lovely. So let me give 7 minutes per speaker. That's really generous. It's going to be difficult for some, but that's, I mean, that's all what I can do, more or less. So 7 minutes, and let's start hopefully with Claudia. Claudia, you've got the floor.
Thank you. May I answer in Italian? Is it okay from a technical point of view?
Yes.
Ok. Grazie a tutti per le domande.
Well, thank you to all of you for your questions. I'll try and have comprehensive answers for you. On competitiveness, we need to take into account that often when we talk of competitiveness, we only refer to price or cost competitiveness. But there is also such a thing as competitiveness based on quality. In Italy, for example, we have the whole Made in Italy sector, and there's no price competitiveness issue there. It's a very competitive because we compete on quality. And when we talk about innovation, there again, we need to look at innovation that leads to qualitative differences for products, not something that only has an impact on cost or prices. That just by way of introduction. What I'm trying to say is that if there's an increase in labor costs, that's not necessarily negative for competitiveness for 2 reasons. The first reason is what I told you, not all sectors compete on price. And secondly, what I tried to show you through my article is that if labor costs increase, but if at the same time production increases because of the introduction of new technology, then that will have a positive impact on competitiveness, and that increase in competitiveness in turn will then compensate for the increase in labor cost. But this is not an automatic mechanism, and I did make that statement at the outset. It really depends on a company's capacity, a company's ability to have an impact on prices, and it also depends on the strategic choices of companies. You know, are they going to increase cost because they introduce new technologies? That's something that they want to do, but there's no automaticity. And this brings me back to one of the questions that you asked. You made the point of workers' participation in the board. Is that relevant? I would say yes, it certainly is. Because if you can influence the business strategies of a company, then that really means a great deal. I can talk for Italy. After years of reform, we now have a low-cost workforce, a lot of precariousness, and there's no incentives for companies to achieve better results. Their incentive is just to employ more people at low wages rather than invest in research and development and innovation. But that really depends on the strategic choice made by the company. If work is precarious, below cost and flexible, then that's an incentive to continue along those lines. It doesn't lead to competitiveness based on new technologies, which then in turn leads to better paid jobs, which are not precarious jobs. So that brings me in conclusion then to what was said about the cross-border dynamic to the production process. What was highlighted nowadays is of crucial importance. Often in Europe what we see is that there is a strong trend to delocalize some parts of the production stage. Germany did this, for example, to a great extent. They delocalized certain production to the east of Europe. But if you have the labor-intensive production stage moved to where there are low wages, then your productivity gain is achieved in the country of origin, even though production takes place to a great extent in the delocalized country. But unless there's an exchange between countries where they try and protect their purchasing power, there will always be this trend to try and do that and move production elsewhere. So as I see it, we would need to coordinate between trade unions to avoid this dynamic of happening, because otherwise there will be productivity gains in one country, which, however, is achieved through work carried out in another country. And the role of trade unions here at national but also at transnational level is of vital importance. Now, it might seem counterintuitive, but in reality, a well-paid workforce which is well-informed and which has a certain number of rights to work stability actually all contribute to productivity gains in companies. And it really isn't a burden on productivity, which is what is sometimes suggested. I hope that covers most of the points you made. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stefan, to you.
Okay, right, thank you. This is such a tricky subject because there's so many different factors coming together in this. And I totally agree. Productivity is not just labor productivity. Capital productivity matters, and so it's not just labor itself that matters in the development of productivity and the evolution of living standards. Now, Stefano asked about public goods and the impact of that. I think it's a crucial question because it implies the externality of things that are going on. We have heard a lot of focus on what happens in the firm, in the companies, and the management issues there, and the productivity in the firm itself. But that is only a partial aspect. Take, for example, Frank has said that with AI, you can access it at very low cost. which is true. I mean, all my students use ChatGPT. I use it too. It's fantastic. I have a private tutor at home anytime I want to do something, and I pay $20 for that. But everyone does it. This is the externality effect, which means the demand of electricity on the clouds in which all the information is stored is enormous. And this is a kind of accumulation of capital that is only reflected in the macroeconomic data and never in the micro data, whether it's a firm or whether it's a student or whatever. So we need to take that into account, how these macroeconomic effects are in a way reflecting micro decisions. And another area where this is most obvious also in terms of public goods is digital skills, or not just digital skills, skills in general. This is a policy issue and it's an externality of greatest importance. In Italy, about 40% of the labor force is unskilled labor. In Germany, it's 10%. It makes a big difference. And it brings me back to what I said about capital and labor productivity. This difference is not just about the labor productivity of more highly skilled workers. It has an impact on capital productivity in an important way, because ultimately the productivity depends on what we call in economic jargon the production function. Now, if there's been estimates by the ECB which shows that for the euro area as a whole, the elasticity of substitution between labor and capital is roughly 1, which means it's like a Cobb-Douglas production function, as we call it, which means that if you invest, the investment will lower the capital productivity but increase the labor productivity. Now, that is a contradiction. But if you have high elasticity of substitution, this changes. And you can actually have both increases in capital productivity and in labor productivity. Now, the ECB estimates show that, for example, in Germany, the elasticity of substitution is of the order of 5, while on the euro area it's 1. Now, with that, of course, it means that Germany has capacity to increase wages in a way that countries that are very rigid, like Italy, have not. I think in Italy a lot of things have changed since the Paduan reforms came into practice, and we've seen it in the data that I'm showing there. But what that means in terms of the question that Javier had, what's the difference between my approach and what Fontana did? And the answer is, I focus on the equilibrium wage, and then I look at the deviation of actual wages above or below the equilibrium. Now, I would agree with Claudia that the increases in wages have an impact on how much the equilibrium wage increases, and therefore labor productivity drives that together with capital productivity. So that is important. But you can go beyond, you can go above that, and then you lose capacity, because what it means is that your return on capital will be reduced relative to the others, and when that happens, there will be less investment. And then it is kind of falling back. Then it doesn't work anymore. I mean, to take a brutal example, the labor productivity in Germany is about twice of Portugal. And of course, the wages in Germany are also about twice of those of Portugal. And it would be crazy to say, oh, well, let's just increase Portuguese wages to German levels. That doesn't bring up Portuguese productivity to that level. So what I find much more important is that we understand what are the determining factors of the equilibrium wage, and let's bring that up. And what we see, and you have the charts, I think, in front of you, what you can see is that the equilibrium wage does not evolve in the same way everywhere. In some countries it has improved, in some countries it is deteriorating, and I think that is the issue that ultimately matters for the standard of livings of workers and societies. A last thing about the transfer of profits and profitability and so on. Yes, of course, it's true that, say, Ireland has attracted companies that are also benefiting from tax benefits for the profit and corporate taxes and so on. But ultimately, that will show up in the productivity. And is it a transfer or not? I think we have to talk much more about the distribution of profits and corporate taxation to see how that can be maybe structured in a more fair and equalizing way. But that is a taxation issue. I don't think it is primarily a productivity issue. The productivity is really how much output do I get out of a given or evolving capital stock, and that then the capital labor ratio influences the labor productivity. And so in the end, that is the issue that we have to address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franca. Your 5 to 7 minutes.
Oui. Alors, merci à vous.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all those questions. I had a question as well, actually. I was sending a message with some photos and everything, and it reminded me this idea of non-determinism. I want to come back to that. When we're talking about that type of technology, obviously it can automate a lot of different tasks. It can also destroy jobs because of that. I mean, that's very clear. Because they're doing the activities that a person doing that job would normally do. But the possibility of these technologies are also very important. And I'll give you an example. 2 French banks, let's say one bank, they use the same tools, or one uses AI, the other doesn't. And what do they do with that time gained? Because now the AI is doing all the automated functions that the bank can do. Well, what did they do with that time? They improved the quality of client service and client relations, human relations, therefore, because they can spend more time on doing that. So the end goal was to improve the services, provide better quality services. It was really to bring in more clients because they had this better service. Now, the other bank decided to cut jobs. They had the same AI tool and just cut jobs. So I just want to remind us that we should keep this in mind. We might often say, okay, there are short-term gains. We're going to keep a few hundred or a few thousand euros more, but that's just the quick way out sometimes. Now, Isabelle, I want to respond to what you said about energy consumption. Yes, I think that Europe, rather than just running behind the US, in particular, the US model, because of course they use a lot of energy and water, perhaps we should look at other models. China has demonstrated that it is possible with certain types of machines that go a lot faster, that don't need as much data and therefore fewer data centers. There are other ways to do it, but I think we do need to do our due diligence and looking at corporate responsibility as well and say how much are you consuming, and it's not good in order to achieve these objectives, etc. Tatiana, the competencies, and there are a lot of disparities. Yes, there are people who who aren't really digitally literate, that is really significant, because that means that in the very near future they're going to be cut off from these jobs, because these jobs are going to exist, they're going to be generated, but they're going to need certain skills, not just technological skills, but there also has to be some kind of capacity to reason, to be able to analyze all of these things, images and everything that's part of this. And the loss of employees can actually be a problem there, because if machines take over their job, then if they think they're going to, maybe they don't want to give the machine all the information that they need. And then, of course, this can actually lead to a breakdown in the process. And that's why the employers themselves have an interest in negotiating a good framework with dialogue for these jobs. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franca. Isabelle?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just to pick up on 2 points. The first one, the question about the automotive sector. And there I would say we've seen the limit of the approach on competitiveness search. 25 years ago, I remember the CEO of Daimler said there is too many cars on the planet, but not enough Mercedes, actually. And I actually, this set the scene, because what happened, I mean, we've seen how they've dealt with it. It was cost-cutting strategy. I mean, the car sector has become the example on how to deal with reducing cost. Short-termist strategy at the expense of the supply chains. I mean, at heavy price in terms of restructuring, plant closure, relocation, often with a lot of public subsidies involved, and of course a huge cost on workers and of course on workers' wage and working condition. 2 months ago, we had the automotive strategic dialogue. The CEO of discussing the future action plan for the sector, the CEO of Renault said, "My objective is to build cars that my workers can afford, and we have actually to support demand." Some of my colleagues said, well, maybe he should do it instead of saying it in front of von der Leyen, but it shows actually, I mean, the wrong approach that has been taken at the expense of workers, at the expense of also public money. So, I mean, there we need to address that problem. I mean, there is clearly a problem of overcapacities, and there is also a problem of governance. I mean, we've mentioned it, you've mentioned it also in your intervention. Overcapacities, unfortunately, the WTO is not anymore the tool we can have. But I mean, we've seen in the past, for instance, on steel, that we also were trying to regulate that. But of course, the question of participation, better workers' involvement, and the question of demand also. I mean, at the end of the day, we see, I would say, the end of this logic of cost-cutting approach, that workers nowadays cannot even afford the cars that they are building. On the question also of transfer of productivity, I mean, there is an issue in Europe about transfer of productivity gains. And I think, Stefan, in your presentation, I mean, you first shown that there is a reserve of productivity in some countries in Europe, but we also know how business models were organized, how also, especially Eastern Europe, some of their productivity reserves have been transferred to the West. But at the end of the day, the price of basic goods are the same, whether you are in Romania, in the Czech Republic, or in Belgium. So, I mean, the question of the wage conversion we've been talking about that now for decades, but we still haven't managed to tackle this issue. I mean, the European Minimum Wage Directive is a first element of answer, but we would need to see a result faster. And of course, this situation has very high political cost. I mean, we've seen it in recent elections. So, in this debate, and coming back to artificial intelligence, I mean, artificial intelligence, digitization, you have huge opportunities to deal with growing inequalities, but also you have huge risk in terms of possibilities to widen the inequalities. And this is something that we have to tackle, because otherwise this will lead to a huge political backlash, and to also we will see it in the election ballot. So, I mean, this is a major issue in front of us, and as trade union also, we have to be very loud about the need to tackle rising inequalities between countries, but also within countries.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. Marco, floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucy. Je vais écrire quelques points.
I jotted down a couple of points, which most of the speakers have mentioned. First of all, workers and productivity. Well, in our opinion, we have developed that, and wages are going up, and there's a substitution of capital at work that leads to an increase in productivity, and then in turn an increase in wages. I think the danger here is to mix up the concepts of productivity and competitiveness. Productivity is fairly well defined. Competitiveness, however, is a dangerous obsession, as Paul Krugman once called it. And often in the past, competitiveness meant wage moderation to become more competitive for export and to make products easier to export. Now, we can't all be net exporters, which means that there's a race to the bottom, and that ultimately harms everyone. And what we see now is that with customs tariffs, there seems to be a return to that. I myself have a question for Mr. Collignon. Maybe I can ask you later, we can discuss it. But this equilibrium wage and the underestimation of that in certain economies, on the whole smaller economies, I was just wondering, doesn't it depend on the structure of the economy and the multinationals that you mentioned? Profits are achieved in countries where there is no real production, and in that case you have capital productivity, which is very high. You have a margin to increase wages, but in those self-same countries you know, the average will be achieved by multinationals and financial sectors, but won't be achieved in industrial sectors or the artisanal sector. Then there's company governance. Andrea raised this. If I think of the steel industry in my country a couple of decades ago, the people running the companies were engineers. Now, economies are increasingly financial in nature, and they're different people running companies. They have a different understanding of production and of the economy. And I think that illustrates very well the types of changes that have taken place. Now, Czech mentioned the digital giants in the US and that productivity gains there are much greater than in Europe. Well, we have competition rules in place in Europe, and that might go against these tech giants being created. Then AI and jobs. Now, 10 years ago, there's the Fry-Osborne study, and the result of that study was that half of the jobs were under threat from digitalization, not so much AI, but I don't think we should see AI as this scarecrow. So far, the effects haven't been that significant or that negative. Unemployment in relative terms is okay, employment rates are okay. So there hasn't been a real catastrophe following digitalization. Maybe the same is true for AI. Maybe they're using it to soften up the trade unions, as they did in the past with competitiveness. But we need to look at the way in which we're going to work in future, rather than concentrate on the excessive risks or dangers that AI might pose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. I mean, it has been already extremely rich debate. So in a way, I would ask Philip, because you've got the inputs, you've got already the draft of the opinion, and you've got your own view on it. So immediately passing to you, Philip.
Thank you, Lucy. First of all, I would like to refer to the context in which we are all facing at the moment. We have global uncertainty, we have a trade war, and a return, I would say, to 18th century mercantilism. And also we have declining trade union density. Let's not forget that. Also, we have a minimum wage directive that is currently stuck at the ECJ. Okay, let's not forget that either. And the other point I wanted to mention actually is the dominance of tech giants, which Jack rightly referred to, and the aggressive trade policy of China. Okay, I mean, we could end up being the collateral damage of this war between the EU and the United States, with China obviously with a far more aggressive trade policy than it has ever had so far. But I wanted to mention actually that we focus on productivity. The main problem in the EU is not productivity per se, but productivity growth, the change in productivity compared to the United States, okay? And this difference is heavily distorted by the tech giants, which invest very heavily in technology, ICT, AI, etc. And just to keep this in perspective, when compared with Europe or the European Union, US companies, from a startup situation with a capital of no less than 10 billion US dollars, okay, are far more numerous than what we have in the European Union. And part of these, of course, are the tech giants. And that makes a huge difference in terms of productivity. And, all right, we have, I mean, the point Stefano was making, I think, is extremely relevant. We don't have anyone here from Group 1, but we've heard time and time again that we need to revisit legislation, simplification, again, okay? Will that make a huge difference? No. No. The point I want to also make is that actually there is a, first of all, the point that Javier was making actually, that there is a distinction between competitiveness and productivity. That is crucial. But there is a strong correlation between productivity and competitiveness. And this is actually well documented, well researched, and we had actually 2 economists here that actually gave us presentation. And I said, and this is important because we as trade unions, we need to have evidence as well. We heard last week at the plenary, amendment after amendment on the part of Group 1. Evidence-based, evidence-based. Well, this is it. We can also play that game. Actually, we can play it better than them. All right, sorry. Sorry. Yes. Okay, that is, it's well, the correlation between productivity and competitiveness is well documented. And of course, productivity can definitely have a positive impact in terms of competitiveness. We've heard about wages, and I want to refer here to the question of nominal and wage argument, or the wage difference.
The clicker.
Yeah.
Yes, that might be useful.
Yeah. Here we are. Because this is also interesting for us as trade unionists. Nominal wages actually have increased in recent years. They have, especially after the Ukrainian crisis. But actually to compensate for higher energy and food prices. Let's be clear about this. And in my opinion, actually, there is evidence of this, which actually shows that when you consider then real wages, on average, of course, we have to look at on average, in other words, all EU member states. In 2024, this was actually 1.1% below pre-pandemic levels. So the argument that wages actually is impacting competitiveness is not there, okay? And even though this year we expect actually to be convergence between nominal and real wages, I'm not sure it's going to happen. Because with the tariffs, and we expect actually higher prices, consumer prices, we expect actually inflation to increase. And therefore, this conversion actually could not result. Importantly, and this has actually been mentioned actually by the speakers today, the labour share argument. Now, very simply, what do we mean by labour share? It's the part of income, national income, that goes to workers by way of compensation. Okay? This has actually been falling for the last 20 years. And actually, it shows actually that in terms of the relationship between wage growth and productivity, they have not been aligned. And real wages actually have increased at a much lower rate than productivity. And the reason, obviously, we're seeing capital, of course, claiming a higher share or a growing share of productivity. So this difference, and this, as I said, I pointed out in the slide, it is a stark difference between developments in real wages and capital, which implies actually that the main driving force for productivity has to be innovation, okay? Which, as Draghi actually mentioned, is not actually sufficiently taking place across the European Union. Of course, this does not mean that labour productivity is not important, but clearly we need to invest very heavily in technology in order to enhance productivity. Now, this brings me actually to the next slide, which is actually on the wage dynamics argument. Wage dynamics, of course, we're looking at negotiations here, collective agreements, etc., have actually not caused inflationary pressures in the European Union. Okay? And again, I support this with evidence in the opinion. On the other hand, business, especially in recent years, although this is actually slowing down now, have recorded higher per unit profits, okay? Despite the energy crisis, the increases in price of energy. Now, of course, from business's point of view, these higher profits actually have compensated or acted as a buffer for any inflationary increases caused also by, let's say, higher wages. So they've had it good, yes, businesses, despite the crisis. And the productivity growth, as I mentioned, is falling. Growth is falling in the EU. And this, again, is mainly being caused by investment in innovation and in human capital, which in turn would then boost labour productivity. I think we have the scientific evidence of our speakers today to corroborate this fact. Now, of course, if we want to strengthen labour productivity, this would then allow, of course, scope for wage increases that are sustainable. And this is, of course, something that we as trade unionists need to convince, of course, businesses when we come to negotiating. So actually, what I'm saying is this. Both productivity and wages can increase at the same time without having actually a negative impact on competitiveness. And again, there is evidence of this also in the opinion. And of course, this brings me then to the role of trade unions, which is critically important. But of course, we've heard, and we know it, of course, that investment okay, and innovation is the responsibility or the primary responsibility of businesses. Okay? But of course, we as trade unionists have a key role to play here as well, primarily through through collective bargaining and sector-based agreements that, of course, need to be aligned with strategy, business strategy. I think we've heard that as well from the Italian economist, that this is important, vitally important, that whatever we negotiate has to be aligned with business strategy. But of course, there is strong research, OECD, etc., that shows actually a positive link between productivity on one side and workers having a voice about change, including, of course, how we adopt AI, but also introducing changes which help to increase productivity. And of course, importantly, in the draft opinion, I recommend, in particular, reigniting interest in co-determination. Okay? The role of Works Council also in supporting co-determination, collective bargaining, etc. So that is critically important. And of course, that will then help to increase the labor share that I referred to before. This is the last slide, so I'm drawing to my conclusion. And again, collective bargaining can definitely support productivity by promoting and supporting the work environment, and importantly, helping to facilitate the workplace innovation that is required, of course, to espouse technology, etc., in a way which is human or worker-centric. And above all, of course, we need the investment, as stressed by Draghi himself, in advanced technology to become more and more competitive. Now, what I wanted to mention also in addition, and this will also be included in the recommendations of the opinion, is the relevance of the minimum wage directive, which, as I said, it remains stuck and is important if we want to increase collective bargaining coverage up to 80%. Okay? Secondly, we need to implement the social dialogue recommendation, okay, which obviously supports collective bargaining and sector agreement. We need, as trade unions, insist upon this. We need to insist upon the proper functioning of Works Council for specific industry, also to support co-determination. We need to also refer to or to include or to insist on social conditionalities, okay, in terms of collective bargaining, etc. And we need to consider also the effect that the average workforce is increasing in terms of age. We have an aging workforce, and therefore we need to ensure that the older workers remain as productive as possible. So the demographic aspect is clearly important. I know I will not include, obviously, reference to SMEs, but that is also important because we can also play a role there, but especially the role of government. And here, of course, in the opinion, I refer specifically also to the role of governments, which is, of course, mentioned, of course, by Stefano in terms of public investment, which is critical also to support skills development, education, and also the adaptation of technology. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Philip. So I assume it's a summary of the proposed opinion. So we are in a really privileged situation because we've got really some almost 20 minutes for questions, clarifications, comments. I have seen Stefan that was not agreeing with something what Philip has been saying. I mean about the wage share, I assume, but up to you. But now still possibility to ask for the floor, so I can see Mateusz. I can see Andrea. I can see Christina. So I've got Mateusz, I've got Andrea Monet, I've got Christina. Do I have you as well? Okay. And I've got Stefan. Okay, so by that I am closing the list, and Mateusz, your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lucy. 3 minutes, not necessarily. I think it's gonna be shorter. Filip, I'm switching to Polish as we have the interpretation. Filipie, dziękuję za pomysł tej opinii.
Thank you very much indeed. Philippe, for what you've said, and we need strong arguments in dealing with the employers to make it clear that there's not just a social dimension to this, but that we also look at the results of companies, what we could possibly develop further, and I think there's a lot of research work being done. What do unions do? In the 80s, this process started in the US, and that's maybe something that we could develop further. You know, what the impact is of trade unions, which is difficult to measure, but what do unions do under that research? They looked at the motivation of workers, the turnover of workers, and also how relations are built in companies. Now, I must admit, I haven't read the whole opinion yet, but maybe these types of arguments could be added, because these are things that are difficult to measure. And I do think it's important. What do unions do? And I was surprised to see how important the work is and what kind of arguments can be used. I'm pretty sure that the employers are not aware of these arguments, and if they are, they don't want to listen to them. So that's why we need to keep repeating them. And I also have a second question. You mentioned deregulation and simplification. Wouldn't this be the right time as trade unions to call for this, but to also call for collective bargaining and for social dialogue, so that we can have fewer provisions in law, but more done in negotiations between employers and trade unions? Because in that context, of course, you need less regulations. Maybe this is the right time to bring it up.
Thank you, Mateusz. Aren't you by chance opening an Pandora box, you know, especially from our part of Europe? Andrea Monet, please.
Grazie. Anch'io ammetto.
Thank you. I too must admit that I haven't read the whole opinion, but I'll certainly read it soon now, having heard from Philippe and what he's had to say, because I do think it's of vital strategic importance for our work. I simply have a question. A great deal has been said about worker participation, and Philippe has highlighted how in the opinion there's also a reference to the system of co-determination. I believe worker participation in our various countries is understood differently. Sometimes it's co-management, co-determination. So I do think it's important to make sure that we have the big overview, the big picture here, so that participation can take the form of participation in a board, for example, and other possibilities. But my very specific question then is on financial participation of employees. This possibility of employees holding shares and being shareholders. They can maybe even pool their efforts to buy shares. But as shareholders, they could provide added value, and as I said earlier, they could counter the interests of investment funds who might only hold 8 or 9% of the shares, but determine the strategy of the company. So, what is your assessment on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina.
I would like to say thank you very much to all of speakers, experts, absolutely great presentation, and thank you, Chair Lucy, for organizing this debate, because truly it's very important. And I am a member of the group who are going to prepare this opinion, and for me, like a chair of union and for Lithuania, it's very important. Because now we start to debate about that, because we start to debate about the directive of minimum wage, how to implement in our country, how to change our labor law. But what we realize that productivity, it's very important. and salaries. It's very connected. And now, because the last time you saw that in our country salaries rise quite in higher speed, and now our employers said that Lithuania should stop with salaries rising because we became not competitive. And it's very dangerous when I see that's the only way to keep competitiveness, it's a stop to rise salaries. And as example is that many factory of producing clothes, textile was closed because we truly cannot keep competitiveness with Bangladesh and other countries where it's very low salaries. What is important to me, it's a role of social dialogue. It's the last time we see that directive of minimum wage just say about that every country should have a plan how to improve situation with social dialogue. For us, that's very important. If here it's a very good document, we need to prepare our national plans. We start to do that. Our government now take a lot of efforts just to improve that situation. But other way, I would like to ask how to motivate employers to be involved in social dialogue. European Trade Union Confederation start to talk about public procurement. Maybe that's also instrument how we can use just to improve our social dialogue. And once again, thank you very much. And we also should to consider for small companies like in Lithuania, 90% it's a small companies, how we can keep competitiveness with that giants what you have mentioned already in your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Your comment.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a guest here, and I don't want to be impolite. And Philip, I appreciate a lot of what you said, but I find it important that we stick to the facts. And as you can see on my slides, there's one sheet that shows euro area wage shares, and the blue line shows what it is on the average for the euro area. And it is fairly stable. It has fallen a little bit in the late 90s, but since then it has basically come down maybe 1 or 2 percentage. I have to check my data to give exact data. But on average, the euro area wage share is remarkably stable, which is also shown by the following chart, which shows the changes in the profit ratio, in the ratio between the profit share and the wage share. Now, that means if this goes above the zero line here, then it means that the profit's increasing more than the wage share. But if it is below, it means the wage share increases more than the profit share. So quite clearly, in the long run, this is stable. But we have shocks. Deep shocks, like global financial crisis, the profit shares collapsed. But and if you show the following one, no, the other one, up, no, this one. This one, yeah. So you see here quite clearly, during the global financial crisis, profit shares collapsed, but then they picked up again. They compensated for that. Okay, but in the long run, stable. Similarly, we see that before COVID and sort of the post-Euro crisis, wage shares were deteriorating. But then they picked up during COVID, and then they fell down. Then the profits went up. That is the profit inflation that we have during that, and then that comes down again. what you see also with these red bands around it is that there are significant changes between member states compared and deviating from the euro area. And the other sheet that you have, which is giving it country by country, you can see, if you show that again, the one, this one here, next, this one, where you, no.
No.
Whoops, what was that? The wage share, wage share. That's the one before that one. Here. No, one. Yeah, one up. Two up. I don't know. Anyhow, if you look at the wage share, which is, no, not that one. This one here. This one.
Which one? Euro area is stable.
Euro area blue line is stable.
That one. No. It's up, further up, much further up. Here, this one, yes. So there you see the wage share. Now, what is remarkable is how big the differences are between member states and the euro area in general. And you see that, for example, in Portugal, the wage share was radically falling for a long time until the end of the euro crisis. Then it started to pick up again. Now with the inflation stuff, it came down again. The wage share is the relationship between the real wage and productivity. So if productivity increases and real wages are stable, then of course it means that the profit share is increasing. But on the other hand, if you are increasing the real wages in line with the productivity, the wage share remains constant. What you see here is that in some countries, significant fall, like Ireland or Latvia or whatever, but you see in Germany, it has been going up and the wage share has increased to a degree that Germany has been losing in recent years, basically since the Merkel years, has been losing competitiveness, and now the whole economy is in shambles. But that is different in other countries, like Italy, which has really turned the corner. And so I just would like to invite you to really look at the details and the facts and not go with this just general feeling that many of us have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I sincerely hope the professors and experts are not going to fight each other physically, even. No, I don't expect this. Definitely. 10 minutes for you, Philip.
Yeah, so I probably need less than that. But let me start with the last point, because this is an interesting point. Actually, I refer to the labour share from the Labour Market and Wage Developments in Europe 2024 produced by the European Commission, and actually refer to this in terms of the labour share, but as defined as the national income going, that part of national income going towards compensation for workers. So I think the definition is different. Okay. No, but
this is Commission data.
But this is I'm referring specifically to the report published in 2024, which actually refers to the labour share. So I've taken actually that ad literam from the Commission report. Now, in terms of the other points I wanted to raise, yeah, where are they? I forgot. Misplaced the paper, actually. Where is it? Okay. The point that was raised in terms of the Polish colleague, relevant point, but I would say actually that in terms of the productivity, we've seen it falling, or the growth of productivity falling, because actually I would say we have not invested enough in terms of the necessary technology, etc., but also in particular skills development, which of course are changing. The situation has been changing, and we need to focus more on in terms of skill development. Andrea mentioned, of course, the issue of worker participation. I've actually referred to that also in the opinion, which is actually more than co-determination, okay? And actually, I am waiting for a German colleague of mine who's actually working on a proposal for workers' participation in terms of share ownership, having part of shares, which I think would actually have an influence also on policy development, not just in Germany, but across the European Union. The point mentioned, of course, in terms of the need for focusing also on small enterprises, that is briefly referred to in the opinion. But of course, social dialogue is extremely important. This is why I mentioned, of course, the need for the relevance of social dialogue, and the implementation of that initiative to be fully implemented and followed up by trade unions across the European Union. The point, I think, one point I wanted to refer also, the need for trade unions to collaborate across the European Union. I think that is also very important also to ensure that there is actually addressing productivity across Europe, okay? We are so fragmented at the moment that this is also actually one of the problems that the European Union is facing. Not just the capital market, but also actually also in terms of collective bargaining across the European Union. Lucy, that's it from me.
Very well. Thank you very much. I mean, I'm not going to make any really revolutionary conclusions out of today's meeting, but from my perspective, definitely it has been extremely important, extremely interesting and useful meeting with involving actors from different various sides on an issue which, as trade unionists, we are using each and every day when bargaining collectively. I mean, a lot of our prerogatives, I would say, have been confirmed, at least for myself, clear to me, so clarified, although some of them really not that easy to understand, and the different formulas. One would really need to have the presentation and have a detailed look on it, whereby, as usual, you will receive all the presentations so that you can use it and work with that then after, of course. But what is clear to me is that it's definitely very much, because we are talking about the impact, especially then on the wage increases, which is the main aim of the collective bargaining, let's be honest. So this being in a way, and I mean, I would be in a way arguing with you, Stefan, on the wage share, because you took into account, of course, the euro area, but what about the non-euro countries where the wage share is traditionally much lower? And I'm sure that since COVID, again, in my country, the share is decreasing, still until now. But I mean, these are some technicities, but there might be countries, and you referred to it, especially smaller countries and East European countries, where the wage levels are just not sufficient, and there's quite some space for improvement. Very good to hear. But for me, then, the clear implication is it's about us trade unions. It's not about us trade unions in the concrete countries, but it's about us trade unions being able to cooperate really effectively transnationally. Because it's usually not the owner in my country's company, is the owner from completely different country. And the decision-making processes are rarely being done in the plant on the spot. Means up to us trade unions. Still, in good old time, when I was younger and nicer, I used to be in the collective bargaining select working party of the EMF, European Metal Workers Federation, where we spent long hours debating if, as trade unions, we would be able to put on the table a demand that would be increasing wages at least of the same percentage all over the Europe. In a way, we got at the end, you know, to a consensual proposal. Let's take inflation plus productivity, which should be for the companies neutral for the costs. Then we got to a fair share of productivity and so on. But at the end, we didn't succeed to get it to be presented at the same time in all the EU countries, this kind of common demand, how we call it. Not to increase the variation, disparities and the gaps, we should be really seriously thinking which should be the task and the roles of trade unions. Also in the view of AI coming here, and definitely which is the taxation of the real worker, and actually still a huge question mark if we would be able to tax these technologies, because we need the return, we need the public money for financing the public goods we all need. So for me, it is a huge ideological debate that is front of all of us to be really able to fulfill one of the main tasks of the EU, to increase of the well-being of its citizens. Of course, by helping also the companies and making favorable environment, but seems to me that we just stick to making the good environment for the businesses without the direct impact on the citizens. By that, let me thank all the panelists, all the guests of today. Thank you, Franca. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Claudia and Marco. Huge thanks to you for the inputs. Let me thank you for extremely active questions, involvement into the debate. Let me thank the interpreters. Thank you very much.
This is ACG data, quarterly.
Let me hugely thank our Secretariat for preparation of today's meeting, especially Margarita, the leading person. Thank you. Technicians and so on. It has not been easy, even also from the technical side, but I am happy we managed. As I said, this is